Hi kids! So I thought since we weren't able to do the cooking classes we talked about before you went off to college, that I would go ahead and videotape me making your favorite family recipes so that you would have them at school in case you want to make something that reminds you of home. So we're going to start out with blackened salmon. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put together the blackened spices mixture, which contain all of these spices right here. So you can see there's a lot of different spices that make up the blackened spices, and spices can be super, super expensive. I mean, it could be $4 a pop for each one of these, so you can see how expensive that could be if you want to make them on your own. So if you're really good and you get good grades and you do everything you're supposed to do, maybe you'll get a little package with some blackened spices that you can use. The great thing is that if you make a mixture of your blackened spices, you can put it in a Tupperware container and you can save it and use it again and again and again versus having to make it over and over and over. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we add is paprika, and you need 3 tablespoons of paprika. So it's a lot of paprika. Paprika is great. It's got a really kind of smoky flavor, and as you can see here, I don't have 3 tablespoons. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to half the mixture, which will still be plenty of blackened spices for what we're making for dinner tonight. The other nice thing about this blackened spices is you can not only use it for salmon, you can use it for chicken. It makes great blackened chicken as well. All right, so we've got paprika. Now we're going to add onion powder. And it calls for 1 tablespoon of onion powder, but since we're halving the mixture, it's going to be half a tablespoon of onion powder. Then we're going to do a pinch of garlic powder. Now you do want to be careful. Garlic can be super overwhelming, and so you just do a little shake, and that's all you need. Next, the recipe calls for white pepper. I'm not that fancy, so I'm just going to use regular black pepper. And it's just a teaspoon of black pepper. So in this particular recipe, I'm halving it once again, so it'll be a half a teaspoon of black pepper. I do like ground pepper better than just regular black pepper, but whatever you have will work perfectly fine. So half a teaspoon of black pepper. And I mean, spices, it's okay if you kind of do approximations. If you don't have exactly the full amount. Let's see, next we've got cayenne pepper, and it calls for a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. So we'll do a half a teaspoon. If you don't have exactly the right amount, it's okay. You can kind of make up the difference, or it can be a little bit shy on one particular seasoning or another. It might change the flavor slightly, but not significantly. You won't even notice it. Next is oregano, and we're going to do a teaspoon of oregano or a half a teaspoon of oregano. Thyme is next, same, a teaspoon, or in this case, a half a teaspoon. And then we're going to add, it calls for a half a teaspoon of celery seed. Now I've used celery salt or celery seed. Just a word of caution, if you use celery salt, you don't use as much because otherwise we'll make it too salty, or you can cut back on the salt so that it kind of counterbalances. The recipe actually calls for celery seed though, so if you can find that, it's great. It's not a super, super common spice. And it calls for a half a teaspoon, so we're going to use a 1/4 teaspoon. And then lastly is salt, and it calls for a tablespoon of salt, but of course we're going to do half a tablespoon. All right. So this is a tablespoon, you can see here, and I'm just going to fill it halfway up. Great. All right, so now we can just kind of mix this around, and this is what makes up your blackened spices for your salmon or your chicken or whatever you're making. There you go. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to season the salmon with the spices. So The thing about salmon, you can use any kind of salmon, really. And if you go to the grocery store, sometimes you can find salmon that's frozen. My favorite, and I think what tastes best, is actually Atlantic salmon. And if you go back to the butcher, there's almost always Atlantic salmon that comes in either you know, like fillets or I guess like salmon steaks, if you will. Or you can buy like a long fillet and you can actually cut it. And if you cut it, you can freeze it by putting it into like a freezer bag in single servings and putting those into the freezer. And then you can just take one out when you're ready to cook one for yourself. And obviously that'll go a long way in terms of kind of cutting your costs as well. But we went ahead and just got some Atlantic salmon steaks since we're cooking this for dinner tonight. And you can see here, they're good size, just Atlantic salmon steaks. And we're gonna lay them out here. All right, so you wanna set your oven to 400. Now that would apply to a regular oven or a toaster oven. So again, you can cook it in either format. Now the first thing that we wanna do, now that we have our salmon steaks here, and we've set our oven temperature, is to prepare our pan. I like to use just a basic kind of cooking sheet or cooking pan. And then I prefer to use parchment. You can use like tin foil. Parchment's not that expensive and it's great for baking and roasting. I use it for everything. And the nice thing about parchment is it just helps everything cook evenly and you don't get like a burned side. So I'm just gonna go ahead, and it's also non-stick. Non-stick, cooks evenly, and no burned sides. So I'm gonna just set that down. And then with the salmon, I'm gonna go ahead and just put a very, very light drizzle of olive oil on top of the salmon. Now the other thing that you wanna be careful of as you prepare to put your blackened seasoning is you don't wanna get any contamination of the fish into your seasoning. And you can layer the seasoning as thick or as thin as you like based on how much blackened seasoning you want on your salmon or your chicken. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna take this spoon and I'm just gonna kind of dust the top of each salmon steak with your blackened seasoning. All right, plenty left over. I'm gonna put a lid on that and save it for the next time we cook it up. And then what I like to do is just kind of use my fingers and rub it around so that there's an even coating of the blackened spices across the whole steak of salmon. And then that way, if I see any parts of the salmon where I wanna add a little bit more seasonings, I can do that. All right, that is as simple as it gets. We're gonna put these salmon steaks right on the parchment and we're gonna throw them in the oven at 400. All right, so the salmon has been cooking now for about 16 to 18 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and take it out of the oven, cook it for about 18 to 20 minutes. That's gonna give you the kind of result that you're looking for, where it really is just nice and flaky, just like that on the inside. All right, guys, make sure you come home for dinner. I love you.